Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is the 6th installment of the Harry Potter video series, where we will be discussing the Half-Blood Prince. In this book, we learn more about Harry himself and begin to crack the mysteries of the story. Some of the more superficial aspects of the book have been dropped or been backgrounded by more important themes and aspects of the novel. So without further ado, let's get into it. In the opening sequences of the novel, Dumbledore comes to visit Harry and the Dursleys, which makes for a very entertaining scene. They sort some things out like Sirius's will and the fate of Kreacher the house elf. Then, after a short escapade to visit Horace Slughorn, Dumbledore pulls Harry aside before entering the Burrow with him. Here they discuss Sirius a bit. "Sirius represented much to you that you had never known before," said Dumbledore gently. "Naturally, the loss is devastating." "But while I was at the Dursleys," interrupted Harry, his voice growing stronger, "I realized I can't shut myself away or crack up. Sirius wouldn't have wanted that, would he? And anyway, life's too short. Look at Madame Bones, look at Emmeline Vance. It could be me next, couldn't it? But if it is," he said fiercely, now looking straight into Dumbledore's blue eyes gleaming in the wand light, "I'll make sure I take as many Death Eaters with me as I can. And Voldemort too, if I can manage it." "Spoken both like your mother and father's son, and Sirius's true godson," said Dumbledore, with an approving pat on Harry's back. "I take my hat off to you, or I would, if I were not afraid of showering you in spiders." Harry is resolved to fight, and he's dealt with the loss of his godfather, so he can move on from this loss and look toward the future. In this novel as well, we see the difference between the prophecy and choices within the Harry Potter world. It is often heard that Harry was not adapted to defeat Voldemort, and that he usually gets by through luck and through more talented friends. A common criticism is that Harry was a poor chosen one. However, Dumbledore addresses this close to the end of the book, in the chapter where they see Slughorn's full memory at last. Harry was given a choice, and was not bound by the prophecy to do anything. Harry has always made choices. He had never been tempted by dark magic, and always chose to oppose Voldemort. This stemming from the love that Harry bore for his parents, so that he could never side with someone like Voldemort. Ever since the first book, Harry had been choosing to oppose Voldemort. He was not compelled by any prophecy, and if the prophecy were never made, then Harry would still have opposed Voldemort, given that Voldemort kills his parents. The only reason that the prophecy was important in any way was because Voldemort chose to believe in its importance. Voldemort believed that the prophecy was inflexible and absolute, and so chose to act upon it, causing the prophecy to hold significant weight on his actions. If he had never heard it, then the prophecy might never have come through, because Voldemort might never have sought out the Potters. Dumbledore explains that Harry must not set store by the prophecy, and his decisions should be his own. Harry describes it aptly once the epiphany strikes him, and he understood at last what Dumbledore was trying to convey. Harry watched Dumbledore striding up and down in front of him, and thought. He thought of his mother, his father, and Sirius. He thought of Cedric Diggory. He thought of all the terrible deeds he knew Lord Voldemort had done. A flame seemed to leap inside his chest, searing his throat. "I'd want him finished," said Harry quietly, "and I'd want to do it." "Of course you would," cried Dumbledore. "You see, the prophecy does not mean you have to do anything, but the prophecy caused Lord Voldemort to mark you as his equal. In other words, you are free to choose your way, quite free to turn your back on the prophecy. But Voldemort continues to set store by the prophecy. He will continue to hunt you, which makes it certain really that one of us is going to end up killing the other," said Harry. Yes, but he understood at last what Dumbledore had been trying to tell him. It was, he thought, the difference between being dragged into an arena to face a battle to the death and walking into the arena with your head held high. Some people, perhaps, would say that there was little to choose between the two ways, but Dumbledore knew, and so do I, thought Harry, with a rush of fierce pride, and so did my parents, that there was all the difference in the world. I'd also like to address the idea that Harry gets incredibly lucky in his opposition to Voldemort. When Harry faced Voldemort in the first book, he had the help of Ron and Hermione, so that they all got through the obstacles together. Hermione remembers how to stop the Devil's Snare, but it was thanks to Ron and Harry's level-headedness and quick thinking that she was able to conjure the fire quickly and prevent any serious damage. Harry's skills got them the flying key, and Ron's expertise at chess got them through the next challenge, something that was extremely specific to the situation. Could Harry have beaten the chess set? Probably, but the fact was that Ron was a better chess player than Harry, having played it for much longer and knowing better strategies. Hermione then helps him with the logic puzzle afterward, but as we saw in the Triwizard Tournament, Harry was perfectly capable of solving logic puzzles when he put his mind to it. Getting past the troll would have come down to quick thinking as well, something that we know Harry was rather good at. He is able to best Quirrell thanks to the lasting protection of his mother's love, which isn't luck, but a direct consequence of the choice that Lily made when she opposed Voldemort herself when he was a baby. In the second novel, Harry comes face to face with two giant creatures. The first was Aragog, which he was able to escape thanks to the flying car, which is a bit lucky. He was bound to be lucky at least one time. But when faced with the basilisk, everything that happens is due to Harry's choices. Harry chooses to show great loyalty to Dumbledore, which is what calls Fawkes to him. And then, only a worthy Gryffindor could pull the sword from the hat. This was not luck. And then, Harry battles the basilisk and manages to kill it by plunging the sword through its skull. In the third novel, he fends off a large score of Dementors. In the fourth, he bested the Triwizard Tournament. He had help in the first task in terms of strategy, but once the broom was in his hand, it was all up to him and the dragon. And there was no luck involved there, just Harry's superb flying skills at work. For the second task, the imposter Moody ensured that Dobby got Harry the gillyweed, which arguably isn't lucky on Harry's part since the imposter Moody needed Harry to win the tournament and was skewing things in Harry's favour. Once in the lake, however, Harry had to get past the Grindylows and Merpeople on his own. Then in the final task, it was all on Harry. He gets past several obstacles on his own, and even though the imposter Moody took out several more, Harry still held his own against these obstacles. Then in the fifth book, he fights off the Death Eaters and was the only one unscathed in the fight at the Ministry. The only reason it was such a disaster was because Luna, Ginny and Neville insisted on coming with him. And now, in the final two novels, he will continue to do amazing things and ends up defeating Voldemort in the very end. Harry is bound to get lucky sometimes, but I think a large part of it is attributed to skill, daring and quick-wittedness, which it is shown time and again the other characters do not possess. Harry is a cut above the rest, and he is a good hero for the story. In this novel, it seems that most superficial sides to Harry Potter have been abandoned. There are very few mentions of pure-bloodedness, and ironically enough, Voldemort is half-blooded, and he views those that are half-blood like him to be more dangerous than the purebloods, which, if we follow the illusion of race, seems to make sense. It was a mixing of blood that brought about Voldemort, and what was more, the Muggle parent is the one that abandoned him, caused him to have these resentful feelings. Admittedly, the relationship was one that was forced onto the Muggle, but he still felt nothing toward his son, and indeed did not care or think about him in the slightest. Prejudice resurfaces at odd intervals throughout the book via the house elves. There is a moment where Harry and Dumbledore were discussing the case of Hepzibah Smith, a woman who owned the cup of Hufflepuff and Slytherin's locket prior to Voldemort. Similar to the murder of his father and grandparents, Riddle blames Hepzibah's death on her house elf Hokey. Harry then makes the claim that they laid the blame on her because she was a house elf. However, this is not the case, and that line was shoehorned in there to invoke resentment toward the Ministry. But Hokey was a likely candidate for the murder. For one thing, she remembered mistaking poison for sugar when making Hepzibah's afternoon tea. She was also very old and forgetful, and she also confessed when questioned by the Ministry. The Ministry even agreed that it was an accident. If they were prejudiced against the house elf, then she might have been charged with murder. Similar circumstances were presented with Morphin. He remembered and took credit for the murders of the Riddles, and he had a known history of violence and involvement with the family in the first place. Therefore, it seemed very likely that he was the suspect. Yes, the Ministry did not pursue the case with extreme detail, but it is more often than not that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Something to note is that Ginny was always in love with Harry, but when Harry fell for Cho Chang, Ginny begins dating other boys as well. These boys were mostly black. Her first hookup involved Michael Corner, who Hermione described as the Dark One. Then she moved on to Dean Thomas, and even in the final novel, Harry sees her dancing with Lee Jordan at Bill and Fleur's wedding. Now, she always loved Harry and wanted to be with him, hoping that Harry would eventually fall for her. So perhaps her choice of partners was specifically chosen to awaken that instinct within Harry to protect his own woman from foreigners. But Harry is to blame as well, since he pursues Cho Chang and doesn't pay attention to Ginny's advances. Essentially, men should look after the woman of their own race. They should protect, love, care for, and give them attention, rather than go after the Asian beauties like Harry. One thing that Rowling is to be commended for is her portrayal of evil and nasty characters as dysgenic or ugly. The Dursleys are rather unattractive, and so is Aunt Marge. Voldemort lost all his handsome features upon the mutilation of his soul, and the Gaunt family were all extremely ugly as well. They were cross-eyed and had mismatched features. Asymmetry, in other words. The matron at the orphanage commented on how ugly Merope was, Voldemort's mother. Grab, Goyle, and Dudley are quite dim characters, and so they are portrayed as rather fat, though Dudley tries to apply his large stature by taking up wrestling. This is a good parallel to real life as well, where ugly people, or those who are more dysgenic compared to others, will tend to be more evil or nasty. Those with an ugly mind have an ugly face. Of note is that most of the actors and actresses in this movie, when they aren't covered in layers of makeup, look quite ugly as well. Voldemort's ultimate goal is immortality. He wants to become a god, one that is undying and eternal, and he is prepared to do anything to achieve this end. The recognition of the soul is one that is readily accepted in the world of Harry Potter, as is represented via the ghosts in Hogwarts Castle. However, in this novel we learn that Voldemort wished to mutilate his own soul in the pursuit of immortality. He wished to split his soul and store it in other objects. In fact, he goes further than any wizard, willingly splitting his soul into 7 pieces. Slughorn warns him that this is beyond inhumane, that to split the soul so many times, to maim it in this ungodly way, was unthinkable, that death would be far better than the broken life one would live. Voldemort does not heed his words, and goes ahead with the destruction of his soul, something that mutilates Voldemort's own body, creating the demon we know him to be. And this damage cannot be reversed, even in the afterlife. In the final book, Harry will see what becomes of Voldemort's mutilated soul, and would even feel pity towards it. But this underlying theme, which is at the very core of the story surrounding Harry and Voldemort, shows a very spiritual, even Christian aspect to Harry Potter. This spiritual side is also prevalent in prophecy. Dumbledore and Harry come to understand that prophecies only come true because of people's belief in it. But, as Bruce Shelton pointed out in his blog, there are times when Trelawney delivers a very real prophecy, and such divination, true divination, could only come from God. However, this is never stated explicitly. But there is something there for those who'd like to explore it. The movie begins with Harry flirting with a black waitress and wanting to ask her out, and is juxtaposed with a scene where Harry was intent on following up again the next day, only to be hugging Ginny in the borough a few seconds later. Well, anyway, the forcing of interracial couples aside, this movie is actually a bit better than its predecessors. Though Slughorn's appearance is nothing at all similar to his appearance in the books, he is a good actor, and his portrayal of Slughorn is more than adequate. Harry is no longer shown as a victim. He seems a bit better in this movie, though still not perfect.
Okay, so this morning I'm going to be putting you all through a few drills just to assess your strengths. Quiet, please.
Shut it!
Characters like Snape, McGonagall, Hermione, and Draco Malfoy are quite good as well. However, the biggest upset is that of Dumbledore. Much of this novel revolves around the relationship between Harry and Dumbledore, and the most powerful scenes occur with Dumbledore. However, with Michael Gambon's portrayal of Dumbledore, these scenes fall flat. For all his saying that he cares for Harry and wants to treat him like a friend, he clearly hasn't shown that in the previous films. And these random meetings that he has with Harry in the film, and odd remarks about his relationship with Hermione and his needing to shave, isn't enough to strengthen a bond between these characters. Because of this, the good of the movie is counterbalanced with the poor acting of Dumbledore, and the flatlining of important and exciting scenes. Even the directors realize this, so they try to add some action in the movie with the introduction of this scene, just in case anyone was falling asleep while watching the film. But there's no sense to this scene. Bellatrix and Fenrir Greyback show up at the Burrow to taunt Harry and seemingly duel him for no clear purpose. Ginny runs after Harry as well, and they both end up in the middle of a bog and fight the Death Eaters for all of 1 minute, before Bellatrix and the other one decides let's just blow up their house and leave. It served no purpose whatsoever. Some of the movie scenes are also quite awkward, like Lavender visiting Ron in the hospital wing, Harry and Ron speaking about skin, and Slughorn's parties. Well, those are supposed to be a bit awkward. But throughout the movies, there's this odd mix of serious story and awkward moments between characters. With the addition of these odd scenes, we also get the exclusion of certain explanations and good interactions between Harry and Dumbledore, like the aforementioned conversation where Harry finally understands the prophecy did not compel him to act and that he did not have to heed its words. But we also get the inclusion of gaping plot holes in the story. In the movie, Harry learns at the very onset that Malfoy was repairing a cabinet in Borgin and Burke's. Then, when he tells this to Mr. Weasley, he explains that it was a vanishing cabinet, and he even goes so far as to say that the Death Eaters were known to use them to travel between places. Then, later in the movie, Harry enters the Room of Requirement, where he knows that Malfoy has been disappearing off to, and discovers a vanishing cabinet with Ginny. He also heavily suspects that Malfoy was doing something for Voldemort, and the fact that movie Harry can't figure out the plan makes you want to bash your head against the wall. Everything was laid out right in front of his eyes. There's not even the scene in the book where Harry warns the others that something might happen within the castle. Harry warns Dumbledore in the book that Malfoy might have been up to no good, but Dumbledore assured him that there would be extra auras and the Order of the Phoenix present in the castle if such a situation should arise. Something, by the way, that was missing from the ending scenes of the movie. I guess all those auras and fancy protection took a night off when Snape and the Death Eaters decided to blow up the school. There's also no explanation as to why the movie and Snape called himself the Half-Blood Prince. Snape reveals that he was the prince, but why did he choose that name for himself? It's also the name of the movie that you're watching, but I guess that's not important to explain. Snape was half-blood, his mother was a witch named Eileen Prince, and so Snape fashioned himself as the Half-Blood Prince. That's a short explanation anyway. In conclusion, the movie fails to encapsulate the best moments of Harry Potter. There's even a deleted scene with Snape that would have added some much needed meaning into the films, but they decided to cut it.
Go to your houses. No dawdling.
But the novel is the best to date, bringing with it many answers and questions and tying together the events of the other novels in a neatly wrapped bow. It is quite perfect how earlier events come back into play, like the destruction of Tom Riddle's diary in the second book, or Montag being thrown into the Vanishing Cabinet by Fred and George in Book 5, which is how Malfoy knew about the cabinet in the first place, Trelawney delivering the prophecy to Dumbledore, and Harry learning that the agent of Voldemort that overheard this prophecy was Snape, so that Harry blamed Snape for the death of his parents, all of which was excluded from the movies. They even omit how Bill was attacked by Fenrir Greyback, which meant he might have some trace of lycanthropy, how Fleur remained faithful to him despite this, and how Tonks and Lupin were at odds over their own relationship, and lots more. But before I finish, I'd also just like to recap what's been shown in this video series thus far. By and large, most of the things that they left attribute to Harry Potter don't hold any merit to them. Voldemort is not Hitler, the Death Eaters aren't white nationalists, Pure-bloodedness isn't an allusion to white nationalism, Prejudice against giants and werewolves is quite understandable given the nature of these creatures. House elves are both good and bad representations of slaves. See the second video for a more detailed breakdown of that. Harry is a hero and a leader. He is incredibly skilled, brave, and adventurous. Ron is not a wimp, but a good and loyal friend, the Samwise Gamgee to Harry's Frodo. And Hermione is much less bossy than Emma Watson's portrayal of her, and she is second to Harry when it comes to defense against the dark arts. The book explores themes of love, friendship, and family, and it is a wonderful book for children to hear and read. I have only one book left, where I'll address characters like the goblins, and speak about Harry's transformation at the very end. But also, at the end of this series, I'll make my final say on whether Harry Potter should be one of those included on the bookshelves for future generations. That's it for now. Consider leaving a like if you enjoyed it, and do consider supporting by checking out my book, The Guardians of Aria, on Amazon. And I'll see you in the next one.